Hey everyone, welcome to a beautiful episode of How I Raised My First Million podcast by Asian Hustle Network. So today I have two special guests on the show. I actually known them for a little bit now, and I've seen the tremendous progress they made over the last, I believe, like 3 years now. These founders are definitely hustlers, and I'm super excited to have them on the show. So today we have the founders of Anise Health, and we have Alice and Nisha here with me. I'm just gonna have them introduce themselves real quick. We'll start with Nisha first.
Hey, thank you so much for having us on the podcast. My name is Nisha Desai. I'm one of the co-founders of Anise. To just give you a quick overview of, who I am and why I'm working on this, I met Alice back at Harvard Business School almost 3 years, 4 years ago now. It's been a while, but we both just very quickly were attracted to one another because we realized that we had this shared passion for mental health. And both of us were trying to kind of pivot into being operators and entrepreneurs in this space. So I came from a background in healthcare investing. And then after that, I was a healthcare product manager, working on basically virtual care product solutions for different member populations, including Medicaid and underserved folks. And that really got me to see firsthand from a professional standpoint that a lot of the players that are out there doing digital mental health were not focused on these underserved communities, namely people of color. And so, long story short, Alice and I got to talking and we were like, we've got to work on this. But as you can imagine, with everyone in this industry, it's so much more about personal, your personal experiences with the mental health industry as Asian Americans. I am a second gen South Asian American, and growing up in a really traditional household makes you not talk about your mental health. So I'm happy to share more about my story, but just as a quick background, a big chunk of why I'm here today and why I'm working on Anise is because of that experience of, growing up in this culture.
Yeah, and I do appreciate you sharing that with me as well, right? I think it's so powerful that you guys are dedicating so much time to building this platform. It's so necessary, right? I think that people underestimate like the value of having a cultural focused platform, right? Because as we understand that mental health is such a broad field and there's certain things that may apply to certain people that may not apply to other groups. And I think what you're building is extremely powerful. And I'm I mean, this is where I admit that I'm at fault, right? When I first heard about the idea, I didn't truly believe into it, but now I do, right? And that comes to show that you guys have put so much thought, effort, and hustle into making this into reality. So thank you for doing that.
So glad we turned you into a believer.
Thank you, thank you. Alice, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having us on. Big fan of your podcast and, great to be on one of these episodes. I am one of the other co-founders of Anise. Um, my background is I'm a 1.5 gen Chinese Canadian, grew up in an immigrant household and have split my life in the East and the West. So having to deal with multiple cultures and adapt to different environments have been part of my life growing up. And the reason that I was so passionate about mental health when I met Nisha is through a series of personal experiences that I had. Starting in high school, I had a very close friend who had bipolar disorder, who was poorly managing the condition due to stigma in my friend's Asian household. So even though it was clearly something that the family had dealt with, no one talked about it. And because of that, there was, I think, a lot of shame that my friend carried, which led to, my friend stopping treatment every time there was a little improvement, which is very harmful to someone with this kind of condition. So that led me to see the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and put me on a path to really try to understand the field. So I studied neuroscience in undergrad, where I noticed that there were a lot of systemic barriers that were contributing to whether or not people even came into care, stuck with care, and ultimately got better. That went beyond having just the right drug or the right provider. And feeling myself drawn more to solving that side of the issue, I pursued a path in business. I was a management consultant out of undergrad, and was also a private equity investor in the healthcare space, like Nisha, before business school. But my heart was always with mental health. I was volunteering in the space and wanted to see if I can align my personal passion with my professional focus, which is, why I came to business school. And what I saw there was, as I was exploring the mental health space, was there was a lot of cool innovation that was happening. And there was a really, stark difference in people's awareness and stigma dissipating towards mental health that I didn't have when we were growing up, which was all really cool to see. But I really felt that there was a certain segment of the population that was left behind from this innovation, people who were dissatisfied with the existing care. And around the same time was also when I sought therapy for the first time, even though I had been a lifelong proponent of mental health, never thought I needed it, right? But through doing therapy, I realized, wow, I have anxiety. I deal with a lot of things like perfectionism that tend to really overwhelm me. And, these were insights that I didn't have before starting therapy. But in my own therapy journey, I've had to cycle through multiple therapists, because no matter how much I took the time to explain my background, my family values, my family dynamics, things didn't seem to click. My therapist just didn't seem to understand what was contributing to my difficulties, and therefore I didn't feel like I was making progress. So this is something that problem that I've seen professionally and also felt firsthand. And I know Nisha also has her own personal stories of why she feels so strongly connected to the problem that we're solving.
Yeah, I do appreciate you guys even sharing that, right? When I hear this, for me, the first feeling I get is like I feel admiration for put like allowing yourselves to be this vulnerable and to be this vulnerable with us. I think building this in the mental health space, you had to lead by example, right? That this is a norm and that's okay, and that whatever you're feeling is normal, right? And a lot of times, I know being in an Asian household, like talking about mental health is like unheard of. I remember when I had my first mental breakdown right after undergrad, actually. This is like during like the weight crash. And I was like, dude, I can't find a job. What's going on? I'm so depressed. And my mom was like, I don't understand why you're depressed. Just apply for more jobs. I was like, what? you know, her solution is like put more effort, put enough effort. I'm like, I applied to every single job possible. you know, and yeah, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, I do agree with everything you said. And I just still want to take a step back and kind of talk about Anise Health, right? So Anise Health is a digital platform for mental health and well-being. Um, so you guys met at Harvard Business School. How did the conversation come about? And at what point did you realize that this is the co-founder that I want to work with?
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
I'm happy to answer. So quickly to set the context, yes, we are a culturally responsive digital mental health platform, and we are really focused right now on the Asian American community, but eventually hope to kind of expand our scope of work to touch all underserved communities of color. And a big reason for this is that, as you can imagine, like one size fits all care cannot work when we as a society are growing more and more diverse, and our needs coming from Eastern values are so different from the existing psychological care models that are rooted in Eurocentric values. There's also a shortage of Asian providers. So in training, it's really difficult for some of the values to really disseminate into the overall like knowledge base of the current standard of care. So our goal is to build a new standard of care that incorporates all of the things that we know to be true from our culture, as well as the leading academics, psychiatrists, psychologists around the country who have done years of research on what it means to deliver high quality, culturally sensitive care. So I just wanted to set that context first. But in terms of, like, when was it at HBS that we thought of, this idea? It was in the summer between our first and second year. So Alice and I at that point had already been friends. We were section mates. At HBS, you get assigned to a section on your first day of class. And we were in the same group. So we took every single class for the whole first year together. And we also, like I said, quickly realized that we were both really interested in mental health. So we used to organize dinners. We used to talk a lot about mental health and healthcare more broadly through the healthcare club. And so that summer, we were catching up after our internships, where I was working at a national payer building virtual care products for the Medicaid and commercial populations. And the product that I was building specifically was a text-based therapy app. And we were building it in collaboration with a leading player in the space. And so I got a lot of insight into like the one-size-fits-all digital mental health industry that I was so dissatisfied with from my own experiences going through therapy, that I knew Alice was dissatisfied with through her experiences as she shared. And I got to speak to hundreds of users who we were testing with, who repeatedly said the same things that we had experienced, which is, I can't find a provider who I feel is compatible with me. Like, I feel really exhausted trying to explain myself to these people. I don't feel like I'm getting any better. Like, I feel like I'm saying the same things over and over again and not seeing progress. There are language barriers. Like, my provider doesn't understand some words that I'm trying to say because I can only say it in a particular word that I know to be true from my home. And many, many more. And essentially for me, it was this realization that a lot of these reasons for dissatisfaction were stemming from people's cultural identity, culture being such a critical part of one's kind of value set, their behaviors, their experiences, and inevitably, as a result, their mental health. So I came to Alice that summer, and she came to me with the very similar experience. And when we were just chatting, catching up, like, how was your summer? We were like, whoa, like, this is interesting that we both share the similar conclusion. And there was, like, fortuitously at that exact time, an opportunity to apply to an accelerator program on HBS campus with just an idea. And Alice really encouraged me to apply. So she kind of convinced me. We both applied together with this idea, and we got our initial funding through that program, got to build out the idea further while in school. And then after we both graduated, I actually quit my full-time job to join Anise, and she also joined Anise full-time straight from HBS. So that was a long-winded answer, but that's kind of the exact moment in time that we decided to give this a shot.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving us so much context, right? In terms of, like, you said a lot of great things, by the way, like talking to hundreds of customers before starting a mobile application. That's probably, as an investor, I love hearing that. Yeah, okay, you know your customer. I love the fact that you guys are so committed to this vision too. Like, you guys feel like you guys felt like there was like a calling that this needed to happen. And if you guys don't know, and I think I'm pretty blessed to know Alice kind of decently well now, is that Alice, like, is the type of person that will go out there and make her own luck. Like, there's no one else that I know that grinds harder than her, that hustles harder than her, that speaks and needs health like 24/7 like her. It's like, all right, this person definitely, like, will run through any walls, and she definitely embodies that spirit of, like, I'm gonna go out there, I'm gonna run through walls, like, I'm gonna make anything happen. And that's the type of person, that's the type of founders that you need in order to fundraise. So I'm gonna hop into the fundraising process, because I know that relatively compared to other people I had in the podcast, I feel like your journey is so unique, right? First of all, you guys are You guys raised $1.67 million total. I just saw your recent email, so congratulations on that. You need to tell, PitchBook and Crunchbase update their website because they're at 1.2 with only 3 investors, but now you have like a handful of investors, right? And I want to hop back all the way to the beginning. I know you mentioned that you joined Accelerator while you guys were both at HBS and you guys got your first round of funding. I would imagine that gave you a boost in confidence that this is viable, that this is possible. And I would imagine that you went through what I call a valley of downwards, where it's like, oh man, like, why is no one believing to my idea? Is this even a good idea? What should I do? And I think most people in that rut as founders kind of give up, right? Because they take people's opinions of them quite literally. They're like, hey, like maybe my idea is not that great. And I want to hop into your fundraising process because to me, this embodies grit and grind, right? And persistence. And there's one more thing I want to add to all the first time founders fundraising is that when you go out there and fundraise, a lot of it is like it's not really on you as founders, right? Your idea is not bad. It's just not finding a good fit. And let me explain that some more. So I also do a lot of investments myself, and I realized that depending on the time that founders approach fund managers matters, right? If you're approaching a fund manager who this is his first fund or her first fund, they want to perform really well. They're going to be extremely selective. You may have the best idea, but they won't invest, right? So typically, the advice I like to say is every time you go fundraising, you ask the VC, venture capitalist, what stage of your fund are you, right? And typically, if they're mid stage or late stage, they're more likely to invest.
Mm.
Yeah, that's I just want to add in that part, but I'm gonna take it back to your story. I'm gonna start with you, Alice. So after you got your first check in the accelerator program, how long did it take to get the second check, and what did you guys feel during that time period?
Yeah, well, thanks, Brian, for saying all those kind words. I guess I'm just fearless sometimes. I remember how we met was I was trying to post something on the Asian Hustle Network's Facebook group, and I kept getting blocked by your admin team. So it's like, who's the person in charge here? I'm just gonna reach out to the founder and ask him to post it for us. And you were nice enough to just talk to me, and we became friends ever since. But back to the fundraising journey. So in some ways, we were blessed being in HBS with a lot of support for founders. So we actually got our first big check, 75K, from a pitch competition that was organized through Harvard. And it was a pool of a lot of funds to back Harvard student-founded startups. So that was a good big win for us. But after that, we just saw the market getting worse and worse. This was 2022, and we were entering the worst recession since the financial crisis. And what we experienced was that a lot of what we had heard from investors around, what metrics they would look for early stage startups to get funded, essentially didn't hold anymore. And we were having to basically hit a higher bar to get funded. So the VC conversations that we're having were not really going anywhere because people were either, holding back from investing, or everyone was focused on crypto, Web3, NFT at that time. And when you're not building in the hype space, it's much harder. I can talk more about that. So what we did was really turn to the people that really knew us, which were our friends and family, people that had worked with us, so our former bosses, etc. And this is actually, I think, quite common for startups that are just starting out. But I personally had a really big mental barrier to overcome for me to start asking money from my own network, including my family. I know Nisha also struggles with that. I remember there was a really great friend from school who wanted to invest as an angel investor, and I turned her away because in my head was like, well, what if this and that, and I don't want this to ruin our friendship. But I got a really great advice from one of my former bosses who ended up investing, who is like a fundraising pro because he's a partner at a PE fund, that you're not asking for money, Alice. You're asking them to join you on your journey. And that kind of mentality shift was really big for me, because now I wasn't really approaching to just ask for money, but to kind of share this journey with them. And of course, I made sure that, whoever I was receiving the check from wasn't relying on this investment working out for their livelihood. But it just, like, I think gave me a lot more comfort in asking from our friends and family.
Yeah, I mean, definitely thank you for sharing that context, right? I know the fundraising process, especially as first-time founders and especially as Asian, like Asian background, we're not used to asking for stuff, right? I don't think my parents even asked for anything in their entire life. So that kind of context is kind of passed on to me. It's like, oh, if you ask for help, you're kind of weak, you ask for money and then you're kind of poor. It's like, okay. So I know that's completely different mindset with going out to fundraising. Um, so I do appreciate that context. So I do want to phrase the question again where it's, after you got your first check, right, from HBS, how'd you end up getting your first venture check, right? I feel like going from angel is one thing, asking friends and family is one thing, but when you go out there and ask for institutional money, it's a whole different playing field, right? You got to have all these terminologies thrown at you. You're like, how much equity are they asking for? What does this clause even mean? What's a data room? I'm gonna have throw the question at Nisha, right? And I just want to ask you, like, what was preparing for your first institutional check like? And what are some key things you learned along the way?
Yeah, I'll get started and then I'll fill in any gaps that I missed. But I think the journey that Alice shared was actually a like pretty critical kind of tee up to how we got our first institutional check. We at the time, with the market being the way it was and us being held to a higher bar, we were transparently getting a lot of rejections from institutional investors, and turning to the friends and family is what gave us the runway to essentially get more data, prove that there was product market fit, that we could keep this company running, that we are the right founders to be solving this problem. But we needed more time, right? That's what it came down to, is like we just needed to keep our company running for a little bit longer. And so the money that we collected from friends and family at the time was what gave us that time. Then once we bought that time, we had launched in our first market, meaning we had real world data showing that people were willing to pay for our services, that our engagement rates, which are notoriously very bad in the industry. In fact, I think it's the statistic we like to share is that after just one session, POC drop out of care, and that's 50% more likely than the general population. And we've been able to completely invert that trend, including the fact that 97% of our clients complete their first 4 weekly sessions. So I'm just sharing that information to show that we've been able to really show the data markers that investors told us they wanted to see, what that higher bar was, because of time, essentially. And so, yeah, that's pretty much how we started to attract investor interest. But we also, like you suggested at the beginning, hustled quite a bit. So, Alice is going to a lot of the major conferences that are out there to meet people. We were calling on our advisors to connect us to people that they felt might be a good fit for us. Pretty much doing everything in our power to talk to the right people. And along the way, I think what we realized is that the right people really matter, right? It's not about just getting an institutional investor check from anyone. It's about someone who understands healthcare, someone who understands health tech, and specifically in our case, someone who understands the importance of our problem and someone who can feel that within the Asian community. So, we it took us a while to find the right fit, but once we did, a lot easier to just connect to our investors as people, not think of it as a transaction, but think of it as building a relationship and helping them really understand that, again, we are passionate about this problem. We are the right founders to solve this problem. The data that we are presenting can really resolve a real problem. And as a result, we got our first institutional check after many, many kind of iterations of our pitch, our model, our like you said, things like the data room. But ultimately, if there's one thing it boiled down to, I think it would be the mindset shift of treating it like building a relationship versus a transaction, and just finding the right fit for us.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent story and excellent advice for first-time founders fundraising, right? Truthfully, you don't want to accept every single check that comes your way, because I think of it as you're entering into a very serious relationship. Like, you're literally entering into a marriage where the only exit is an IPO, or your company fails, or you get bought out. You know? And that's a long time, like 7 to 10 years. And I think most people don't put that much thought into it, which would ultimately cause, I would say, like friction between founders and investors, right? I feel like when your values are not aligned to begin with, you're gonna find a lot of issues right off the bat. So I do appreciate you even sharing that, because that is the important part that of fundraising. It's like you need to find your fit. And I like the fact that you talked about putting the relationship first. It really is a relationship, because I think that most of the time, including myself included, my investors are like my go-to people where I hit problems. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Who should I talk to? I'm like, oh, thank God I have these group of investors I can talk to about this issue, because I never had seen this problem before, you know? And I think that's the thing too, is like having people bat in your corner that you can go to at any time. And I also appreciate you sharing your rejections too, because you are going to get rejected a lot in the fundraising process, right? And it's so important not to be discouraged by it, but it's also important to take one or two elements of why are you getting rejected, right? Don't just brush it off completely where it's like, oh, like screw them, they don't believe my vision. You know, ask them like what makes them feel that way. And the one thing I like to say too is like put yourself in their position. Would you invest into your own company right now? Right? If you are not willing to invest in your own company, why not? Right? What are these gaps that make me feel that I should not invest? Because I would say investing, yeah, there's metrics, there's traction, there's all these like, you know, mathematical things you can look at, but a lot of it's emotion, right? A lot of it's like feeling like, oh shoot, I can't miss out. Like I need to be a part of this round. Like they're gonna make it. Like I'm gonna regret this, you know? And that's the feeling you want to invoke. And I kind of want to talk a little bit more about like in the prep. I want to talk a little bit more about the process, right? Of getting there. And that's something that I think your story is so unique, because I have been fortunate enough to see enough of your journey that I seen all the not all the pivots, but I seen most of the pivots, right? And I seen the deck improvement. And I remember the first time Alice sent me the deck like 3 years ago, and the deck she sent me like a couple months now. I was like, whoa, so different. You know? Even though it's still the same amount of slides, the quality of the slides are have much improved. I want to ask, like, how did you guys make those little improvements into your deck after every single pitch? Right. I think that's important, because a lot of times I feel like we don't spend enough time on our decks to improve our pitches, to improve the deck. And honestly, I do feel like it's very unfair to you guys. I must admit, right, that you are held to a much higher bar, but ultimately, I feel like it will benefit you in the long run, right? I think your fundraising process was too easy. You'll probably be like, all right, like, well, just pick a different pivot, because screw it, we go out there and raise more money, right? And I think every hardship provides a great learning opportunity to become a better founder. And I just want to hear about that process itself of like refining your pitch, going back, looking deep, asking the hard question, especially as co-founders, right? Like, how did you guys even talk to each other every time you guys hit a setback? Like, do you guys just call each other out and be like, oh, I'm so discouraged? You know? I want to hear everything about the process. Alice, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, the process. So I would encourage people to talk to other founders, their founder friends that they can trust to just see how people have done it. We've talked to a ton and got really great advice. I think the best practice is to always do the prep work before you kick off fundraising, which includes doing some practice pitches with investors who are not your top pick investors, but are, like knowledgeable enough to understand what you're trying to do, and get their feedback. So you're incorporating some of those elements even before you approach um, like more investors. So doing the prep work, creating a list of target investors, batching them in order of, first wave, second wave, who's like highest priority to lowest, and doing the pitches in those batches. So don't like talk to everyone at once, but collect feedback. We didn't update our deck after every pitch, but we definitely towards the end took a very iterative approach to fundraising where we were incorporating feedback along the way. We also didn't stop building. So Nisha and I had a really clear split of responsibility where I was mainly doing the fundraising while she kind of held down the fort in the company and kept making progress on the business. And I would relay some of the feedback that I was getting around where investors were most hung up on regarding like the riskiest areas of the business. And we try to show with data that we could de-risk it, or we had some validation to show that it could work for our business. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think that just talking through the journey itself, and the part I really want to get to, it's like the more ironically, right? The part I want to get to is the mental health of fundraising, right? Especially as founders and as first time founders. Like, tell me like a story that really in your fundraising process that really discouraged you, and that you kind of needed each other to kind of push each other along. I'm pretty sure you guys have plenty of those stories. We all have plenty of those stories, right? But I just want to hear like one incident where it's like, oh, I want to give up, because you think that a lot. You have so much doubt as founders. Do you guys have any good stories like that?
Definitely. I would say throughout this journey, having a co-founder has just been so instrumental and critical to me being able to even persevere this long. Um, so last year, as we mentioned, we were having a tough time getting funding from the VCs. We thought we had what was needed, but unfortunately, the market really sucked. And I remember I was ordering more business cards because I had run out of them after attending a conference. And there was like a 2-for-1 deal, or like you buy one box and the second box was 50% off. So my first instinct was to get that deal, right? Order the second box. But in my mind, it was like, what if I don't even use up the first box and I have like this one whole box left, like to waste. So like just not knowing if we would survive for another 2-3 months is always like hanging over your head. And during those times, I would just go to Nisha and kind of vent to her. And we did have those tough conversations around like, what if we can't raise, right? What do we want to do? Do we want to pivot to change our stories to, what the market was telling us, where the investors thought the field should go, or do we want to stick with our current idea? What kind of pivots felt acceptable to us and really in line with our interest? And after having those conversations, we both came out feeling like we still had high conviction in our current idea and wanted to keep going. So yeah, that's, I guess, one story of how having Nisha really helped. How about you, Nisha?
Yeah, Nisha, tell us
Yeah.
about your darkest moments.
Many. I think we kind of talked each other out of this one, but I just have to share it because it was just so horrible. But we were participating in a pitch competition in Houston, Texas. Um, and and it was right around the time when we were trying to start raising the pre-seed round, but we're getting rejected left and right, and we like really needed this to come through. And we went there. Alice had probably spent like, I don't know, countless number of hours prepping for it. A lot of time put into it. We had our head of growth, Angel, come with us also to help pitch because we had to have 2 students, and I was no longer a student or didn't qualify as a student at that time. So, anyways, we went there, we did our first pitch, and the way it worked was like it was like a kind of like pre-qualifying round, and then like you moved on to the finals if you were like at the top of your pre-qualifying round, or you got put in as a wild card. And during that pre-qualifying round, we like really thought we crushed it. Everyone told us great things. And then during the kind of final round, we got the weirdest questions, right before the final round, we got the weirdest questions. One of them was like, if you're working on a mental health solution for Asian people, why don't you offer your services in Asia? And then another comment was, not sure Asian Americans require special health care. Why are they special? Like, just very, like, almost like blatantly, like, I want to say racist, but like comments that were just like fundamentally misunderstanding the point of our pitch after we put like this much effort into it. So as you can imagine, we had to like then just like continue showing up for the final round, but we had like all kind of lost interest in this process because it was very disheartening feedback to receive. But again, I think it's the power of having a team, having each other to kind of bounce back from. The 3 of us sat down after all of that and vented, debriefed, and basically came to the conclusion that was, okay, we're here in Houston. We have to last for the next 8 hours because why else did we spend this money and come all the way down here and spend all of that time prepping for it? So though we are annoyed at this audience right now for like not even giving us a chance and fundamentally misunderstanding our product, we need to kind of come out on the other side, be resilient from a mental standpoint, and just lead with confidence and prove with our data again that things are actually working. And that's exactly what Angel and Alice did. And they won us a prize at the end of the night. It wasn't the final, which, we were gunning for, or sorry, the top prize that we were gunning for, but we got some money. And honestly, just the process of being able to overcome how annoyed we were that day after getting those comments, I think was a testament to just the resilience that you need to have. Sometimes the things investors have to say to us are very strange.
Yeah. So I remember that competition. There were 42 startups selected from over 400 applicants to participate in person. And of the 42, only 7 were going to be finalists. And in the first round, we actually didn't get selected as one of the finalists because of the feedback that we got that Nisha just mentioned. But there was a sudden death round where all the startups who didn't make it, so the other 30 some startups who didn't make it get placed in, and they pitch, and one out of those 30 something startups will be moved on to the final round. So in that round, we didn't have any hope because of all the feedback that we gotten, and the chances were very low. But we ended up getting selected in that round to be a finalist. So it was like this huge up and down that we experienced, but had to pick ourselves back again and pitch on this big stage in front of hundreds of people with less than 10 minutes to prep. So yeah.
Yeah, these are the type of founder stories that I feel like are not talked about enough. You always see the glitz and glamour in the media where being a founder is cool. You have a nice airplane, nice Ferrari, Lamborghini, whatever. this is a struggle that is a part of the process, right? And I think Alice, I remember you telling me this story as soon as it happened. Like you text me like, I'm so discouraged right now. I'm like, what's going on? You know? Yeah, so I definitely heard this story in real time actually, and I'm really happy to hear that you guys are able to overcome that. And for you guys that don't know, Angel, I believe, is your head of growth. And I think that she's amazing addition to the team, right? There's only a few interactions I had with her, but every single time it's like she's very firm and she's very like almost like an unbendable will. You know, I'm just like, who is this person? But you can talk to me like that, you know. But it's a good thing,
There's,
right?
yeah, there's not a single person that she meets who she doesn't like win over. She's just a force to be reckoned with, and we're very lucky to have her.
Yeah, definitely a great addition to the team too. There's a few more questions I want to ask. I still want to, since we're on the topic of like the downward spiral of fundraising, I just want to get people a clear idea of what the process is like, right? Because it's not all rosy, it's not easy, but I do want to hear more about the stories of knowing that you have 2 months of runway left. What was the flush of emotions that you're feeling at the time, right? I'm pretty sure that you can't help but stare at the bank account. You can't you feel like you can't make like the best decisions because every decision matters at this point, and you keep thinking to yourself, how do I get out of this rut? How do I get out of this hole? And I would imagine that to be a very extremely difficult and dark time, right? I want to hear from Nisha first. Like, what was that flush of emotions that you felt when you were looking at your runway and you're like, oh my God, we have
Yeah.
2 months left to prove something, to do fundraise. Like, what were you feeling at the time?
I'm laughing because we have done that and had that conversation so many times where every time we get the email from JustWorks, our payroll processor, that like another X $1,000 are leaving our account, we're like, ah, and then we'll like message each other on Slack being like, no. So we definitely felt that feeling and it sucks. But another way to look at it is, if the business is not growing and if you are not doing anything as a business, then there won't be any cash going out. So that's one thing I started shifting my mindset around, especially as that number started to grow, like the cash burn. Was like, okay, it's growing. This is scary, but like that's a good thing because that means we're investing in the growth of our business. And eventually, that number will go down once we reach a certain scale and are able to break even. That's one thing. But in the moments where our, bank account was very low and it felt like there was kind of an end date in mind, I think two things really helped me. One was just this like adopting this mindset. And I worked on this like pretty extensively with a coach and a therapist, but adopting this mindset of like regret minimization and just like what's the worst that could happen in this scenario. I went through that exercise. The worst that could happen is, we're kind of out of a business and maybe we have to return some money to some investors and maybe we can't return all of the money, which would suck. But for me personally, like the way I could climb out of that hole is to basically tell myself, like, how much have we been able to learn throughout this process of being founders and build? How many lives have we been able to touch in the amount of time that we were available as a business, and how many people maybe we have inspired to continue this mission? That really helped me think like the worst case scenario isn't so bad. But the other thing that really helped me is something that Alice kind of always told me early on, which is we tend to have like the right luck at the right time. Like things tend to just like work. So it's a little maybe a little naive mindset, but like she told me that early on, and we kind of have like every time we needed to make something happen, even if it was at the last minute, we've been able to kind of figure it out because we call on all of our resources, our network, each other, and just kind of do whatever it takes. One example of whatever it takes meant that me and Alice stopped taking any salary for several months to extend our runway. And, those are the kinds of things that we're willing to do just in those moments of like very scary times.
Yeah, that part hits deep with me too. And for our listeners that don't know, Asian Hustle Network almost died like 7 times as well. We're just like, oh my God, I keep running out of money. you know, it's crazy, right? I think that in some ways, I'm not talking about like spiritual stuff, but like, in some ways, like the universe just kind of helps you through these dark times. Because I remember from my own journey, it's like every time we're almost out of money, like someone randomly DMs us and be like, "Hey, there's this big brand deal. Do you guys want to do?" We're like, "How did they know? We're out of money." you know, or like you get so desperate, you're like, "Hey, I have an interested investor who wants to do this with you." You're like, "Oh my God," you know. And I feel like it's because the more that you put yourself out there, the more opportunities you create for yourself and you create more luck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that unfortunately, you see more opportunities when you're desperate because you would do things that you would never do, right? When you're comfortable, you kind of just ignore things that fly by. But when you're desperate, you grab onto anything. You're like, I refuse to fail. There's like an internal voice where it's like, I refuse to fail. You have to die trying, you know? I think that embodies the most successful founders that I've ever talked to in the podcast. It's like this feeling of like, you're gonna have to kill me before I give up. And I get that feeling with you guys for sure.
Yes, definitely. I guess the benefit of having two Asian founders who definitely have it in them to want to achieve
Yeah.
Failure
anything
is
that they
not
set
an
their mind to.
option.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Yeah, failure is definitely not an option. I guess the next part I want to talk about is, looking at your runway, finally getting out of the rut and successfully getting. I'm so proud of you guys, by the way. I think I counted like how many venture checks you have. I think over 5, right? And a couple of strong angel investors. Now that you're able, and I'm not saying you're at a good point. You're always going to be in hot water as a founder, right? There's never like this, oh, I can have a sense of relief type of thing. Now that you're able to look at your business holistically, how are you guys looking and recruiting for talent? Right? What's your first 3 hires like? Because that's the most crucial to your company. You're setting your culture, you're setting your vision, what you want to do. And these people have to understand that when you first hire them, that your company will change. You will make pivots. There are things you tell them in an interview that might not happen the day you start work, and that's completely normal. I want to hear about like the way that you are selecting and recruiting talent for your startups because and it's also not talked enough, right? The fundraising process is not talked enough. Making your first 3 hires is not talked enough. How are you guys strategically thinking about that? I want to hear from Alice.
Yeah, so I got a really good advice during from the Gold House Ventures Accelerator program that we participated in, which was one of the avenues that we managed to get some capital to extend our runway while we were fundraising. So that was that the first 5 to 10 hires of your startup should be through your first or second degree connection, just people in your network or friends of friends. And we didn't really follow this principle from the get-go. And, we tapped into various channels, including LinkedIn hiring, and have always had much better luck with people that came through our own network, whether that was Angel, who was classmates with us, or our head of engineering, who was introduced to us through one of our angel investors and had worked with our investor. So that's our approach now, just tapping into our network and finding people who are really mission aligned first and foremost, because we're such a mission driven company. And I think it's really important for people to have that intrinsic drive to be doing what they're doing day in and day out, because it's such a hard work and it's not going to be a 9-to-5 job at all. So they need to be in it for more than just the financial aspect, because that's only going to come more later down the road in the long term. I've also learned that it is tough to train people as a startup when you're so resource strapped, and Nisha and I already have a million things going on. And as much as we want to mentor people and grow together, it's imperative for us to be hiring people with some experience, or at least have a really, really strong drive to learn on their own and grow into the role that we hire them for. So we do look for some sort of like relevant experience more than when we did before. And then I think because we're such an early stage, just the team members who have really excelled are those who are really passionate about building things from scratch and who can put on like almost that founder hat as a founding member, to be like thinking ahead and thinking more holistically about the business than what is assigned to them. So I talked about what we are looking for in these like talent that we hire in early stages. As far as our team members, we actually were hiring as we were raising, because we just didn't want to stall the business or wait until we got everything, all our ducks in a row to hire people. So we hired our head of engineering, we hired our head of growth and hired a director of operations, clinical operations, and a clinical director who's a licensed clinician on the team. And this is the team that will take us to the next level, to the next stage.
I love it. And I guess the next question I want to ask, I know this podcast is running a little bit long. I kind of love it. It's so engaging to me. So I guess the next question I have is, most founders, I feel, at the early process struggle with defining clear expectations and roles for their team members, right? Because I think from a founder perspective, you are dealing with, is this business model going to work? How's my fundraising process? How's our burn rate? We're going to make another pivot. How do I communicate that with the team? How do you clearly define each person's role so then you keep them motivated, right? Because now I think this is like an art in itself. The hiring process is one thing, but like maintaining your culture and delegating and making things move forward, even though you're making a bunch of pivots. How are you setting expectations for these new team members that join your team? Nisha.
Yeah, we've definitely had to learn along the way. We're not experts by any means, but one thing that Alice and I did for ourselves early on was just write it down, which was advice we got from while we were in business school. And that really helped, just, even for us too, right? Like actually writing down what are all the different functions that we're going to have to operate within the business, and which ones should Alice own, which ones should Nisha own. Making that very clear from the get-go, I think, set a good standard and just, I think, good framework for us to then operate the rest of our hires off of. So when we do hire someone new, it's very clear if we're hiring them for a work stream that falls under my purview, like they will tend to be someone that I manage, or if they are someone that is working on a work stream that Alice oversees, then she will be the manager. And then, of course, we kind of came up with a broader like document, which sounds oversimplified, but it's something that we review several times a year. But a document that basically outlines what is our mission and our vision, what are our key values, what are the norms and the rituals that we will like operate based on as a company that reflect those values. And we review those things, like I said, at least biannually, if not more, to make sure that those things are changing as we evolve as a team. And we bring our team members into those conversations as well. So whenever we do like new hire orientation and training, we walk our team members through those values. We walk them through mine and Alice's responsibilities. We make sure it's clear what their expectations and their responsibilities are early on in the process, so that it's a two-way conversation at the beginning, like any questions for us, any feedback for us before we get started. And that way there's no misalignment at the beginning. But one thing that I think has been really important, and Alice started to talk about this, is making it clear that we are very early stage. And that means everyone kind of has to wear multiple hats to some extent. And the best employees right now are those that are willing to kind of like jump into any work stream that is needed. So though we like to have the clear definitions of the roles and responsibilities, we try to make it clear that there's a lot of gray area and we need to like help each other out. Like, for example, if our clinical operations manager was out of town for something, we've had other team members jump in to help with clinical operations for those couple of days. And that level of like being able to cover for each other and understanding overall processes, I think, is really critical when you're early and resource constrained.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing that, right? I think it's so important, and I'm just kind of reminiscing in my personal experience too. Like I have hired some folks that never worked in the startup environment that wasn't a good fit. And you need people that kind of hops in with this not only great attitude, but great mentality. Otherwise, if they're like, no, why am I doing this? It's not my job. Like those are the biggest red flags on the team.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing everything about your fundraising process, about Anise Health, about your personal journey, about your hiring process. So two more questions. So the next one I have is, how have you guys been able to find your advisors as you're scaling, right? And what kind of agreement do you have set up with your advisors? That's something that I want to highlight too during this podcast, because there's so many misconceptions about advisors. It's like, oh my God, it's like someone's helping me for a certain amount of time and I give them this. Or people have advice where you just go out there and just ask for advice, you know? And I just want to hear what your approach to this problem is, because it's so unique. And I know there's not like one size fit all like everything else in life. But I want to hear what your approach is finding advisors for your company.
I think initially our approach was we cast a wider net, and it was more who was in our network that understood anything about startup building in the healthcare space, who had the time to advise us. That our first mentor was connected to us through the Rock Accelerator program at HBS. And I felt that the biggest value that I got out of my mentors or advisors in the earliest days was just them saying that this is a good idea and you can do it, just giving us that reassurance and like telling us to keep going, right? And then we just blindly follow and keep going. But as we grew, there were specific advisors that we knew we needed. So because we're trying to create this new standard of care and really reimagine mental health care for the Asian community from the intervention level, we knew that having that clinical expertise was critical. So we tried different ways to get connected with the leading clinicians in the industry and asked them to be on our advisory board. And then on the business side, we were looking for serial healthcare entrepreneurs, those who had the necessary relationships for our business, such as payer connections that are really important for growing the business. So I would say our advisory board grew over time. Along the way, we started offering advisory equity in return for their time. Some of our advisors have invested in the company. So yeah, I think it's going to be an evolving process.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd add is I've heard from a lot of investors and other founders that like it can almost not be a red flag, but it can be a turnoff when startups have like just too many advisors or have like a slide with like 100 faces on it. Because to them, it's like, what do you need this many advisors for? Or are you even using them? Are they even helping you? So I think part of this process of narrowing in scope and trying to go after advisors that we felt we really needed was intentional and a chance for us to also just like build a cadence of speaking to them. The typical agreement we have is like biweekly. We meet with them for an hour, and that means that we're actually getting like pretty active support from them on current business needs. Whereas I know there are a lot of other businesses out there that like maybe meet with an advisor once in a blue moon. So if you want to get actual value out of your advisors, it's like you need to put that time and structure in place, and maybe not cast such a huge net, but be more targeted. And I think that that's worked well for us in the more recent days.
I agree with that approach, right? I think just building, it's like you said earlier, building that relationship with not only your investors, but your advisors as well. Because, what's the point of having so many different advisors? And not just that, I feel like when you have so many different advisors, there's so many different opinions of where to take the business. And that could be detrimental as you are trying to make pivots, trying to understand the market better. You're like, who's right, who's wrong? Just having a smaller select group of people that you truly trust is crucial in the early stages. So I guess the final question I have for you guys is, and I'll start with Alice first. What do you know now about your fundraising process that you didn't know before? And what advice would you now give first-time founders fundraising?
I think that I know now that fundraising is more of an art than science. Like Nisha said, I approached it more as a transactional, thing before, as I was a later stage investor, mostly investing based on metrics. And I thought this early stage fundraising was going to be somewhat similar. You needed to like nail all of the talking points, the data. But at the end of the day, it is really about relationships. And just like going into your investor meetings with that mindset, where understanding that you're not going to come out of the first meeting with a check. That shouldn't be the purpose of the first meeting. And a lot of people say that fundraising is like dating. I've gotten this advice from so many founders, investors, and I think there's some truth to that if everyone in the industry is talking about it. So you need to like just show enough to get them interested, but not seem too desperate. And you need to like create FOMO, which I've had investors tell me that I need to do. Like you need to learn how to play the game, which is really silly, but it's, I guess, just what needs to be done. So just approaching it more like they're not people who are going to sit on the other side of the table, but they're going to be joining your team and you're finding a partner through this process is how, I will approach my fundraising going forward that I didn't necessarily have before.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I hear that a lot too. Like you're basically dating your co-founder, you're dating your advisors, you're dating your investors, you're basically dating everybody as you're going through this process. And it comes down to one thing, right? Just building that relationship with them is important. I think a lot of it, it's more of an art than it is in science, I would say. Like making people feel a certain way is important, right? You have to think about the elements of trust. Like essentially you're having this random person you never met before trust you that you are the right founders for this vision in this company. And that's more of an art than it is a science.
Yeah. I think trying to look at things from the investor's standpoint and understand the things that may be going through your mind, their minds, and what they're perceiving as risk, and trying to like proactively address that is one of the keys to success. So part of that was also learning where we stood as like first-time founders with our background. We had solid professional and educational background, but in startup land, that only gets you some pedigree, and there's like a lot more experiences that in investors' minds help to de-risk a founder, like having scaled a startup before, worked at a VC-backed startup, or having raised before and successfully exited, and just knowing where you stand and what kind of risk profiles you carry can help you to help address those, at least try to upfront.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. What about you, Nisha? And I just want to phrase it differently. What do you know now about the fundraising process and building at the same time that you that you kind of wish you knew a while back?
Um, it's, I mean, I knew it was going to be hard, but I think the last point that Alice made of just like kind of setting your expectations a little bit and knowing where you might stand in the broader context of things is a good reality check to just, not let yourself down so early on in the process. I think we realistically should have allocated more time to the process of collecting those first checks. We thought we could do it much faster than we did. We didn't fully realize the gravity of the recession on the market and how that might impact people's risk profiles. We also didn't fully realize just how different it is to be a woman of color trying to raise versus a white man. And we also didn't realize what Alice said about, not being being first-time founders and the risk profile that carries with it. So a lot of different things working together that might impact an investor saying yes or no. And when you combine all of these things together, along with the fact that, because of COVID and because of the rise in telemedicine, there were a lot of dollars put into mental health in like the 2020, 2021 timeframe. I think all of those things combined put us in a position that we should have been slightly better prepared for from just a time standpoint, like knowing it would take longer, we'd need more data, and we'd just need to do more. And while I don't think any or most of that is fair, I think it's the reality. And I think what I wish I would have known earlier on is just to have that mental toughness from the get-go so that you can be more productive about building your business, right? That you won't have as many days where you're bummed out and can't necessarily keep working because you're really bummed out. So I think the key to continuing to build the business is to also just, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but not give a shit, just keep going, keep building, and, say screw the haters, the right people will come along at the right time. But you have to have that mental toughness to get you through what's going to be a difficult and long journey, especially if you're combating a lot of the confounding factors that we did.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that for sure. I do want to add one more thing before we end the podcast is that as founders, the fundraising process will never, ever end. You're always engaged in the next set of investors, even though you're not fundraising yet. You'll probably thank yourself for that later because going cold turkey into the fundraising process is difficult. And a lot of times you are nurturing these relationships years in advance for your fundraising process. So it never ends, guys, unfortunately. Okay. So we're at the end of the podcast. I appreciate you guys so much for your time. I feel really inspired. Also very proud of your journeys, right? I knew asking you guys to come on the podcast that this is the feeling that I want to get. It's all the hardships, all the struggles. And I want to make this podcast as not rosy as possible because I just want to be real with our listeners and I want them to gain something out of that. The very final question is, how can our listeners find out more about Anise Health and find out more about you guys?
Yeah. So best way to find out more about us is on our website. It's www.anisehealth.co. So on that website, you will be able to learn a lot more about our holistic care model, all of our services, including our newest launch service, which is our peer support circles. So we have, one-on-one therapy coaching, digital tools, but we also have this new thing, which is a lighter touch, kind of less intimidating environment to talk about culturally sensitive topics. They're clinician-led and they're much more affordable as well. So definitely check those out. And then lastly, you can check us out on either LinkedIn or Instagram, where we post a lot of really, in my opinion, helpful content to destigmatize mental health, sharing the journeys of other individuals in the Asian community, as well as, psychoeducation about, what is depression? What is anxiety? How do you navigate your first therapy session? What do you look for in a culturally sensitive provider? A lot of things that there's just not enough awareness around. So definitely check those out for content.
Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah. And in addition to the individual services that Nisha talked about in our peer support circles, we also do a lot of work in the community to try to destigmatize mental health and normalize that conversation. So we work with a lot of Asian ERG groups or nonprofits with our clinician-led workshops and webinars to talk about topics like burnout, depression, anxiety. So we would also welcome those inquiries through our website.
Amazing. We'll include that all in our show notes. But thank you, Nisha and Alice, so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Brian, for having us.
Of course.